So welcome to this episode of Out of Left Field. This topic, this day, on this night, on this really warm night, is cars. Why we think they're a bit of a problem, perhaps.
Automobiles. And saying that I think that they're a bit of a problem is, of course, a bit of an understatement. Just as a disclaimer, they bug me on a lot of levels, including existential.
Yeah, I understand the problems with, traffic and almost being hit by a car, for instance.
Yeah, that did almost happen to me once.
Yeah, well, it happens to many people, to be fair.
Actually, I mean, just for starters, in the United States, I'm sure probably Canada also, automobiles accidents are the leading cause of death for young people like under 30. They're the number one killer of our precious youth and the future.
Precious youth. And they're also one of the main killers for the planet. Consequently, one of the reasons why it's so fecking hot tonight.
Fucking hot right now, and I can't stand it, and we had to turn off the fucking fans for the microphones.
Well, of course, because the microphone audio has to be picture perfect and blah, 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 blah.
You shut your goddamn mouth.
And this all comes back to cars. It's all cars' fault. That's, I think, where your opinion on this would be. You seem to, I mean, to be fair, we're talking about, quote, cars, but we don't mean just, anything with four wheels on it and an engine and a steering wheel.
I think we shouldn't have ambulances anymore. We shouldn't have fire trucks.
Horse and buggies we should go back to, is that it?
Yeah. No, what we mean is just the fact that your average person in your average city around the world would technically get to and fro work through a automobile, a car, a personal, something that a person owns to get themselves to and from wherever they're going.
Yeah, something with four seats in it and almost always only one person. One of those kinds of things. Trucks and utility and shit, those those are slightly separate issue. The issue, I guess, with cars, certainly for you, because I'll be honest, you've made no at all secret as to your opinion of cars for the longest time. You've been railing against them and complaining about them and whining occasionally about them for, years, really.
Guilty as charged.
But, I guess all I would say about that is just, cars are everywhere, so, tough. They won the war, I guess.
Well, I think the war is still being fought, and the war might even just be started at this point. Because in the last, I think, 10 years especially, there have been segments of society that have been pushing really hard towards cycling, pedestrian-friendly cities, mass transit, sky trains, accessible public transportation like buses, etc. Basically just opening up the city space for different kinds of transportation that doesn't require someone to own a car. And I really, really like this development. I think that cities have become large enough, global population has become large enough, density has become a big enough issue that cars just don't really work the same way that they used to, and it's become a massive fucking problem because in most cities we're having constant problems of gridlock and traffic, and I mean, Christ, even in little old Victoria, with a population of 500,000 people in the greater Victoria area, there's a notoriously massively clogged traffic artery that goes to the western communities, and it's crowded every single day. And it's a 20-minute drive that takes an hour. Yeah. Because it's so fucking crowded, and it's a ridiculous spectacle watching it, and it's like soul crushing. Like if you commute that route during that time for your job, it's like, well, I guess I'm going to be in traffic for 2 hours every day for 5 days a week for the rest of my goddamn life.
You know what the best part about that one is, particularly, is if you happen to live in the western communities, which is sort of a suburb, right? And that's what most of those people are doing. And then they drive into Victoria in the morning and they go back home at night. Both in the morning and at night, you spend that whole gridlocked traffic jam nightmare staring directly at the sun. There and back every day.
Oh, yeah. That sucks with the glare. I mean, I think monitor glare is bad, but it doesn't put people's lives at risk.
Nope, but I mean, to be fair, I guess with that is you don't have to worry about high-speed collisions. That's at least in that case.
That's a good point. So I think it's important to mention why we're talking about cars at all, and it's not just because I have a deep-seated hatred for them and are extremely vocal about my opinions
in
about
every
how much I
possible
like
way
them.
and facet of your life that you've managed to find.
Yes, no, but more than that, it's just that cars being the dominant mode of transportation really dictates and affects the way that people live their lives and what people spend their time doing. And it's important, let me borrow a term from the right-wing economists, in terms of opportunity cost, where time that you sink into one thing is something that you could be doing literally anything else with. The true value of a decision really also takes into account the alternative options, right? So people are spending 2 hours a day in their cars. Well, public transit, where if there was more money for it, if there was more investment, people could maybe spend, instead of 2 hours in a commute, where they're stuck at the wheel looking at the fucking sun and a license plate of someone else, could be spending that maybe reading a book or doing something interesting or spending time with their families.
Well, they could just be at work earlier and therefore off work earlier, and just that time could be spent actually doing something productive.
Yeah, sure. Anything else.
Sleeping 2 extra hours.
And so, cars really inform a lot of people's decisions, people's behaviors, what they spend their time doing, and it's something cars are so ubiquitous that people take them for granted.
Yep.
Right? They think that, well, this is just the way that people get around.
We need them. If you live in the suburbs, if you live in somewhere that's not in the middle of a city, there probably is no other way to get from your job to your house
on
than
time.
a car.
Yeah.
Or at all, in some cases.
Yeah, well, even if you take the bus, the public transit system, try as they may, is underfunded and doesn't provide the same kind of accessibility that, you can't...
Well, yeah, their primary concern is the most profitable routes, which generally means the most dense areas, which is also... So if you happen to be in suburbs or in a place that is outside the center of the city, which will probably be people who can't afford to live in the middle of the city,
right?
You got to have a car, which means you got to spend that time in your car driving back and forth to work and all that crap.
Yeah, and great swaths of North America have been designed, decades of infrastructure built around the assumption that your average person owns one, right? And it can be really... I think that makes it a really sort of unique problem where it's not like we just have to change some policy or some law or some attitude. We have actual fucking brick and mortar infrastructure that's built, and a lot of it, and entire cities and greater metropolitan areas are designed around this concept, which is becoming increasingly problematic. And you can't just unbuild a fucking freeway, right? Or easily repurpose it. What else would you use it for? So, I remember recently I was in California, in Los Angeles, and it was I had never seen anything like it before. Just as far as your eye could see, it was just cars back to back to back to back to back to back, all going to the same place, more or less. But there was just so many cars that everyone ends up just sitting in gridlock half the fucking time and going forward, stop, forward a few inches, stop, forward a few inches, stop. It's wow, this is a really efficient way to get around this car that can go so fast, And it was crazy for me because while we were driving down this freeway at granny and a walker speeds, and you looked out the window and they were building more freeways, more overpasses.
Of course.
More.
There's not enough road for the number of cars on the road, so we need to build more roads.
But it's Jesus Christ, do you not understand the fundamental problem here is that you have, like you said earlier, all these cars, almost all of them, have 4 or 5 seats in them and one person. And if we're talking about how many people can you fit per square meter on a road, a car is literally the least efficient way to do that.
Oh, yeah.
You can fit, 40, 50 people on a bus? 30, maybe?
Yeah, if we're talking speed, if we're talking space, it is. But, the car, the automobile, the car, whatever, it's not just... yes, if you put it that way, it's obviously wrong, quote unquote, for what we need, and yet it's the most popular. And I don't think that's just an accident. I don't think it's just people were, just short-sighted in the way they built cities. Cars are not just an inconvenient thing we happen to have, and oh dear, but oh well. There is a whole industry behind it. There is a lot of economic logic behind why they became popular, why they developed. and ultimately why they overtook everything else fairly rapidly too. At least when like automobiles were becoming really popular in North America, at least in like the 1930s and 40s, there was, there was mass transit systems. There were, trams and some buses and things and trains and stuff, and you could get from your home to your work without owning a car, and that was what most people did. But cars just, then at least, were incredibly more efficient than anything else, it seemed.
Efficient how?
Well, you could go buy one and you could drive wherever the hell you wanted. There was no gridlock. There weren't enough cars.
Right. Well, it's important to mention the origins of cars. Back in the turn of the 20th century, cities like New York were having this pandemic of horse shit, an ocean of horse shit that they were swimming through on their main roads on a daily basis, and it was becoming an actual like public health crisis because there were like literal feces everywhere because there were so many people and so many horses, and the car was seen as this like brilliant solution to their like literally shitty problem.
Yeah.
So at that point, I would say that the car was a truly revolutionary and progressive force in society. In that sense, on the other sense, we used to have things like the streets used to be taken up by, say, public markets and, get-togethers and socializing. It was a place where people met. As cars became more popular, of course, more and more pedestrians began to be mowed down and killed and maimed and paralyzed by these industrial monstrosities. And so they became, hey, I'm a goddamn IT worker, goddammit.
Yeah, well, you don't get to call cars industrial monstrosities.
I just did. So, anyway, the fact that more pedestrians were getting killed and was, kind of gave cars a bad name. One interesting thing is that the car industry actually colluded with media outlets, newspapers, to run a campaign of demonizing jaywalkers. In fact, jaywalking was a crime that was kind of invented by the auto industry because they didn't have seatbelts, people were getting killed, people were careless.
The solution is to just have people not be on the
roads,
yeah.
Right? And so the auto industry effectively usurped the public space of these marketplaces in downtown areas and elsewhere, and replaced them, and now all of a sudden these roads that were once public spaces where people met and commerce was conducted, etc., was now basically the property of the auto industry. Effectively, otherwise you might die. And this trend has continued on to this day and has gotten worse. And there's this kind of animosity between and contempt for the public space. Suburbia is a perfect example of this. Our cities have been built now, this is kind of a trope, a refrain, but have been built for cars, not for people, right?
Yeah.
And it all started with the destruction of the public market because of jaywalking.
Well, it is interesting when you sort of look at, like, from the point of view of like, a transport fleet, we have, you pick any city, it has a need to get people from point A to point B to point C to all these different places. Mm-hmm. And if you're looking at this from the point of view of what would be the best solution, what would be the cheapest, efficient, whateverest way to do that, cars just don't seem to ever really get near the top of that list. And yet they're, as I said, they're the most popular. So there does seem to be some, so where are cars compatible? Where are cars compatible with modern society? And I think it is exactly there, like you said, with the cars are compatible with the individualism of the market, with capitalism, with, buying something as opposed to having just a service available. That public space, that sense of community, however you want to, look at it, and however you might... I think you might be idealizing it a little bit there, if not a lot. But, in either case, it still is, I think, completely valid to say that the car is has gotten its dominant position because it is so... it fits so well with the logic of capitalism. It just is something... It's a product you buy. Almost all of the costs of a car are almost all external. Road maintenance is not something the automobile owner is ever really going to have to think about.
Right.
But if you're talking about a mass transit system, that is something that you have to think about. You have to be sort of aware of that. You can't let the roads deteriorate to the point where you can't drive on them anymore, because then the mass transit system just shuts down entirely. Whereas the automobile owner, I mean, if there's potholes, he can just complain to the city and whine about, city workers not working hard enough or whatever. And yet that whole sort of logic of I own a car and so I have the freedom to go where the fuck I want, it doesn't make sense of what I think is the more modern situation of where we look at these things from the point of view of what they actually do and not like a thing a person owns. Like, you own a car, you own a garage, you own a house in the suburbs. That attitude seems to be sort of falling by the wayside, much for a fairly major reason of simply that people just can't afford to live like that anymore.
Right.
But also because of the developments of technology and transport and things like that, that that doesn't really seem like a relevant goal anymore. Simply to have those things, simply to own a car, to be able to drive it around to go to work, just seems kind of like if you need it. If you have to have it, sure. And since most people still need to have a car for work, it just doesn't. It just means that that's what they have to do. But it's no longer a freeing thing to own a car, it seems to me.
The law of diminishing returns applies to cars more than any other mode of transportation. The more cars you have on the road, the less effective each individual one is. Right? They are so inefficient. I remember in biology class I learned about why an amoeba, or even an insect for that matter, it is limited to a very small size. And it's because they don't have a cardiovascular system, right?
Yeah.
It's just the inner goop on the inside and the outer shell on the outside. And the outer shell is what intakes the air molecules, food, whatever,
right.
to feed the inside. But because of volume, the inside gets bigger at a much faster rate than the surface area increases, and at a certain point, the surface area just cannot feed the inside, and so it dies. And in this example, the surface area is the amount of roads that we have, and the inner substance is the amount of cars that we have. And so the number of cars is increasing at a much faster rate than the infrastructure built to maintain them, and so we get fucking gridlock, and none of it works anymore.
Well, yeah, I guess so. I do think there is. You talked about like the diminishing returns in the sense of more cars on the road is bad, but in addition to that, there was and still is to a limited extent, although major infrastructure projects just aren't on the table anymore. This idea of building highways, of we build highways, connect cities together. This is good both for commerce, for people. You can go travel on vacations. You can do stuff because there's like well-built, blacktop roads. And yet there's never enough of it. There's never enough highways. There's never enough major thoroughfares. We just have to keep building more and more. And it seems now not only have cars become inefficient to the point where they become questionable in a huge way, there's also this problem of the infrastructure desperately trying to keep up with it is become more and more expensive too, to the point where, you look at like the cost of a highway versus the cost of, say, like a mass transit system, and the mass transit system comes out ahead pretty much every single time now. If you just were to put that money into more transit, then you'd have a better, end result. More highways, certainly you're going to like alleviate the gridlock, but A, it'll end up filling in anyhow, and B, it's never going to be dollar for dollar worth it compared to almost any other option.
Yeah, and public services like infrastructure maintenance is always underfunded, and by the time these projects get approved and actually built, they're already obsolete by the time they're fucking finished construction. So it's really this kind of I feel like people's insistence upon using cars is almost a sort of, I hate to use this term, but a sort of mass psychosis where we all, as in, the society at large, likes cars, we like the independence that they give us, blah, 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 but, it doesn't, when everyone is doing the same crazy thing, it doesn't make sense anymore. It's like when, to me it seems insane where, say I'm in gridlock in LA somewhere and I look around and everyone has open seats, 3, 5, or 4 empty seats in the cars, and it's like, you'd think that all these people together would come to the conclusion that, hey, this isn't really working, maybe we could carpool or something, but the cities, suburbia, cars, transportation this infrastructure has been built over the course of decades, and people's attitudes have been sort of developed around it.
Well, Suburbia installs in people an attitude of just, this is my land, this is my fenced area, leave me alone. Same thing with a car. Mm-hmm. Sure, I have 4 seats in it, but I don't want some weird stranger in my car with me while we're driving down the road. This is my personal space. Leave me alone.
Yeah. And that's, I think, kind of the logic that capitalism creates, and this sort of individualist, consumerist economy, capitalist economy that we have. It just kind of... Cars and it are best friends. It creates this perfect little sanctimonious private bubble that you can live in. And
sing to the music on the radio or pick your nose, even though everyone can see you. It's amazing the things people will do in their cars because they have this imagined attitude that they are totally separate and apart from the world outside that window. They will just do weird and strange things.
Yeah, and then complain about the government and taxes and blah blah blah, all while they're driving on a road that was repaired by the public institutions.
Or complaining about insurance or the cost of gas or something. Each and every one of which is a cost that wasn't really borne by cars before, but was an actual cost put on society that society couldn't really afford to just accept anymore. The cost of gasoline, yes, it's increased by the government, but that's to help subsidize mass transit and the repairing of the roads that cars damage more than anyone else.
Yeah. Capitalism and cars just seem to get along so well that it seems like it's really difficult to get public funding for mass transportation initiatives. Why do you think that capitalism and cars go so well together?
Well, like we were saying about the individualism, there's that, but that's more, ideological. That's like the way people feel and think. The actual,
but the economics.
The economics of it. Yeah, I guess in the case of cars, it's just been a very profitable industry, at least historically. I don't think it's any coincidence that at the same time that those automobile industries are effectively dying and doing really poorly from a financial standpoint is also the time when people are starting to go, hey, there should be something better than this. And so all these weird sort of alternatives are being thrown up, and people are sort of trying to find a better way of doing cars, quote unquote.
Self-driving.
Yeah, driving, Uber. There's a raft of different theories or ideas or semi-solutions to them, or carpooling, sharing,
cycling, skateboarding,
cycling,
walking.
skateboarding, and things like that are kind of a different issue altogether. I think there's this attitude people still have that even though the car industry is kind of a massive black hole of a barely functioning industry at this point.
Yeah.
Even when it's doing well, that there's still this desire amongst many people to have that car, and so I guess sort of get back to the original question, why are cars popular? I'd say because they were profitable. They were profitable, and for the most part still are profitable. But that as that profitability recedes, as it becomes harder and harder to just sell more and more cars, without that material foundation, the logic, the ideological buttressing of it will just evaporate, and people will go, why the hell do we need these things anymore?
As a throwback to what I was saying before, where we've built all this infrastructure and these roads are already built, the cities are already planned around the assumption that people are getting around by cars. Sure. It's really difficult to think of how to change that, right? But I think that there's one city in the world that Amsterdam, which made a really amazing transformation. No, really. You can look, there's photos from Amsterdam from the 1940s where you see the roads were built, cars were driving around, there was basically no pedestrian space. and they really made an active transformation, and they fucking destroyed the roads and put bicycle paths and pedestrian paths in, and you can look at pictures from exactly the same point, the camera angle from 1945 versus now, and they were totally changed, and it went from this like dystopian car nightmare to something that was just friendly for pedestrians and your average
I'm not a huge cyclist or a fan of cycling in general.
Yeah, but you walk everywhere.
I do, but I also take the bus.
You are a pedestrian.
Well, I'm a pedestrian, yes, but I prefer mass transit, to be honest. I mean, if there's a place that I would need a bike for, I'd rather just take a bus.
Okay, well, I'm not arguing against buses. I'm just saying that a city with all of this money and time
for those people who have the time and
infrastructure-
energy to take a bike, great, good for them. That's wonderful for them.
Okay, fine. I'm just saying that whether it's bikes or buses, whatever, the city landscape can be transformed, is my point. Right?
I think it can be. It takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of money, too. And particularly in a modern context, it's hard to justify that for what is in principle kind of a zero-sum goal. You know, the goal is not to make a city more productive, it's to make it more livable.
Right.
And that's not really a worthwhile goal, it seems, these days for most cities. I mean, they certainly love to talk about it. I mean, I know Victoria loves to install new bike lanes everywhere, but none of them connect together. They're all just like a patchwork hodgepodge of like a single block bike lane that just disappears into a highway and no one knows what the hell it's even there for.
Well, the current city council here is put like $7.5 million into installing new bike lanes. But
anywhere and everywhere.
But this is like appended upon the already existing car infrastructure, which is not going to be significantly altered by this, right?
No, why would it be? That's expensive. That takes time and money and planning. And if you just look at it from the point of view of how many kilometers of bike lanes should a city of our size have, and you can just find enough side streets and places to stick that in, then you can say, well, there you go, success, done. And I think that it's not unique to Victoria or anywhere else, but there's that attitude on a municipal level that they're looking at it not from the point of view of like a coherent overall system of transport for people, but these kind of like spreadsheet goals, you know,
right.
This number, we just have to hit this number and now we're a quote livable city,
right? And
that's it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it can't fundamentally address the problem that cars are still the overlords of the transportation world, right? And until that's changed, I don't think you can really have a coherent system in place. How do we change that? How do we change the fact that cars are the overlords?
Yeah, they're the people. I mean, it's, you know, cars, bikes, skateboarders, pedestrians. Each one can hit the other and not worry about what happens, basically. I mean, there is a physical dimension to this as well, that if you're driving a car, you are safer than someone on a bike, period. Yep. Particularly if you're on the same fecking, like, lane, where bicyclists are basically the most dangerous way to travel, in fact. I mean, we talked about the problem with cars. The problem with cars being that they're too big and they're cumbersome and inefficient for the overall, you know, transport capacity. But bicyclists, they're the most dangerous way to travel right now.
But because of cars.
Yeah. But you can still say, like, yes, but what would I rather do? If you're someone who's saying, I need to get to work or I need to do stuff, I would rather be driving a car than driving a bike, because I would rather be an inefficient, you know, industrial monstrosity than like worry about dying every single day to and from work.
And as a skateboarder, I can attest to that being absolutely true. And in fact, I prefer skateboarding over bicycling because I can just like stop and pick up my skateboard and walk onto the sidewalk and become a pedestrian.
Just disappear into the crowd.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas a bike has this basically a piece of fucking furniture that they're lugging around with them all the time, and they don't exactly have that luxury.
No, so. Well, I don't know if you've seen some of the people who ride bicycles on the fucking sidewalks in this city.
Oh yeah, I've seen them.
They seem to think it's no big deal.
Yeah, but I don't blame them because it is unsafe to drive on the roads.
Look, I don't think it does anyone any good. I don't think it does the argument of bikes or putting an end to automobiles any good if you're going to drive on the streets. All it does is it makes it really, really easy to just say bicyclists are the real menace. Because they're the people who don't ever follow the rules. They don't stop at stop signs. They don't pay attention to the street lights. They don't care about right of way.
All of these fucking refrains that automobilists...
Yeah, exactly. Or as a pedestrian, I can even say, I've been hit by bicycles many more times than I've ever been even close to being hit by a car.
Yeah, but the reason that is because there aren't enough bike lanes on the
because they're terrified of, if I stop, I'll just get run over. So I just might as well just squeak through and just hope for the best, because it's a safer thing to just, hop onto the sidewalk for a few kilometers than it is to just stay on the road and get hit by a truck.
Yes, and car apologists will use examples like this to trash cyclists and whatever. But the whole fucking reason is because of cars, because there aren't enough bike lanes, because cars are the fucking tyranny, overlords, oppressors. The dystopian nightmare.
They're the oppressor class of the roads.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can't really disagree with that, at least as far as the framework of, power and relationships go on the roads. It's definitely the case that bikes are the unfortunate, middle class getting hit going both ways, as it were. But this, the one thing I've mentioned quite a bit, and this is something I really think is worth sort of getting into a little, is... I talked about, why do people need cars, right? What is the good reason why people need cars? Because people do need them. People don't just buy them because they want to run bicyclists over.
Yeah. Most of them.
Well, yeah, probably most
99%
of them. 99%. There's that 1%. But the, no.
It's always the 1%.
It's always the 1%. There's always that person who's just looking at the bicyclist. But anyway, all I'm saying is people buy cars because they want to go to work. They want to have that freedom to travel, even though most people don't travel with their cars. Right. Particularly if you've got something like the Malahat in your way, you're not going to take your beater up there. It'll probably just break down. Mm-hmm. So you're not going to actually even leave Victoria anyway. And that's, there's lots of other cities where you can make the same kind of point, that urban environment where in principle a mass transit system is sufficient. Most cars don't leave. Most people who own cars don't leave that area. Most people don't use cars for situations that are outside of a transit alternative.
Right.
And yet they still use them. And I think the major reason is because, there is this sort of the historic inertia of just, you get a car and you have it and the house, the car, et cetera, et cetera. But there is also a very real fact that a lot of people need them to get to work on time. That I don't think I've worked too many jobs where riding a bike there would have been at all a good idea. Spending 30 minutes riding a bike to work versus spending 30 minutes taking a bus or even just in a car. That bicycle or even walking or whatever is that's work you have to do before you get to work. And if it's a work that involves, anything physical, that's just fucking not on.
More food you have to eat.
Yeah, it's I don't want to get to work exhausted. Yeah. That's just stupid. There's no reason for that. So I might as well take the car. I might as well take a bus. I might as well take something other than pedestrian, etc. But if I lived near where I worked, that wouldn't be an issue. And so there's this one thing in cities particularly, and I'd say Victoria or anywhere else. This is hardly unique to anywhere. But this whole zoning thing of you've got industry, commercial, residential, and you have these nice little separated areas, and they have the commerce in the middle, expensive housing around that, lower cost commerce around that, and you sort of have this sort of these onion layers of progressively cheaper and cheaper stuff, but everybody has a long distance to get to work. And this whole thing of just how things are zoned and how things are constructed with this really. This still, much like cars or suburbs or anything else, there's this very narrow, sort of an individualistic mindset that this zone, this lot, is going to be used for this business owned by this one person, as opposed to a broader concept of multi-use or, residential commercial development, which provides some kind of, local way of working.
Yeah, and this is, I think, the core of the major problem with cars, insofar as cities have been built around this concept, especially North America, United States, Canada, where, in Europe, for example, you have hundreds, thousands of years of architectural, history, development already built, already.
You can't just knock it all down.
Yeah, and so there's still their city planning is very different, where you have everything in sort of grids. There are multiple ways to get to one A to B. You have commercial shops on the bottom. You have apartment flats on the top. But in America, they just said, you know what? Fuck the last 2,000 years of architectural intelligence, history, knowledge. We have cars now, so we don't need any of that. Let's just build all of our houses over here, residential area, no commercial buildings allowed, and then put all of your commercial stuff over here. Build a fucking highway between them.
Yeah, it's
and
like
you basically forced people into a box where you have to have a car to get from point A to point B. And, where I live, I can just walk downstairs, walk for 5 minutes, and be at a commercial entity.
Sure, but that's, even in Europe though, we will be the dirty socialists who will be, lauding Europe over and over and over again. There is a problem there where in those cities, in that city center, even when you have housing like next door to say you work at Starbucks, and you and the Starbucks you work at is downtown in a city, the odds are you can't fucking afford to live downtown. It doesn't even matter if there's a house or a condo or a townhouse or an apartment across the street from where you work. You just can't afford to live there. So you have to live where it's cheap, which is inevitably going to be in the fringes of the city. And then busing, carring, whatever into your work every day, as opposed to just living near where you work, which is what would be, I think, best. But because of the way the housing industry works, this is it all sort of feeds into itself.
Yeah, well, detached homes, suburbs are the most profitable way to sell land. The infrastructure that we have has been built around this logic of okay, you live over here, you drive your car over the highway, and then you drive, park, whatever. But, the logic of North American cities just baffles me, where you have freeways running through the middle of fucking cities.
Well, so you can get into the city.
Yeah,
you can't get into the city if there wasn't a big fuck-off freeway in the middle of it.
No, freeways and highways are supposed to connect cities, not run fucking through them.
Well, I agree that that's, the goal, but at the end of the day, there is, at least, there is a sort of internal logic to why a highway goes into the middle of a city, and that's to get into the middle of the city quickly. You don't just have a highway getting to the edge of the city, and then you get to navigate into wherever I actually want to go.
Yeah, but that logic only works with cars, where I am, driving. Okay, I'm trying to compare European city planning versus American Canadian city planning.
Oh, I don't think there's as much of a difference here as you're suggesting. My point about the cost of living in cities really does undermine a lot of the benefits of European urban planning.
Okay. Imagine how different the world, the North American urban landscape would be if Suburbia had mixed zoning laws where you could mix commercial and residential stuff, where you have shops on the bottom floor.
I think we have a good example here in Greater Victoria. We have, thanks to the fact that we have so many stupid, crappy little municipalities everywhere on the lower island.
They are crappy.
Yeah, but we have all of these sort of town centers just sort of sprinkled all throughout the Sandwich Peninsula, and yet it doesn't actually help the highways, the congestion or anything like that. Congestion is still a problem because of the cost. Because when you're talking about, say, downtown Victoria, if you're looking at density, where most people work, most people can't afford to live, and that is still a fact, whether or not you are talking about a European city or a North American city.
But I'm just saying, my point is that land use can be much more efficient if you mix the two.
I agree.
Where you don't have all these fucking detached houses in the middle of nowhere.
I agree, but my point is that mixed use thing is only going to be constructed if it's very profitable, and it's generally profitable in places where the mixed use is, you got your like, the classic example is like a 4-story building. The first story is all stores. The next 3 stories are condos. Those condos are owned by people who don't work in those stores.
Right.
So the whole thing doesn't work if that's what you end up building over and over and over again. You're just copying a solution that does nothing to help anyone who wants to live where they work.
Okay, but what's the solution to that? I mean, what is causing the?
I think the only other than revolution, right? Because we can always say that.
Yeah, well, I think that what you're saying and what I'm saying is really that there isn't the current economic paradigm, capitalism, etc.
Sure.
Individualism.
I do think there are reforms.
Yeah, isn't complementary to a efficient form of city planning.
I do think there are ways to do it. One is development, having cities building public housing in the downtown areas, right? Like in those areas where people are working, building housing there. Density is an issue, certainly, but if you're talking about low-cost housing in an area where people are working, then it's not going to have such a negative impact on the transportation system. Because if people can walk to work in 10 minutes, that's what they'll do.
Yeah.
If that's possible, if that's an option available to someone, that's just that's what I've done when it's been possible. I don't think it's going to be a huge problem. This whole issue just goes by the wayside if everybody could just walk to work. But because of the way cities have been planned, because of the way property values have sort of pressurized this whole system, it doesn't provide a lot of options for anyone who's saying to themselves, I have to work, because you have to work under capitalism or you die, and that's just how that is, and I have to have somewhere to live. And those two things are, time and time again, incompatible with each other.
Right.
They don't fit. For most people, well, almost anybody, you just have to, you work where you work, you live where you can afford, and that's it. And those two things, you just, your boss just says, well, you just have to figure that out. And you're the person you're renting from or whatever, you just have to figure it out. You pay your bills, that's all they care about. So this whole issue of transport just gets left up to the individual, and so cars end up looking like the solution, the one solution I know will work.
Right.
I can't depend that the bus is always going to be there, or that it's going to be on time, and bicycling is not really always an option, or
especially
walking.
When it rains.
Or rains. Yeah, like life just, if you're looking for the 100% always gets you somewhere, no matter where you're going, it's going to be a car. And that's something that a lot of this doesn't really address, because this sort of gets into the question, I guess, of, where are cars useful? What are they good for? I think it's that. I think cars need to be treated as sort of like the last option, right, on this list, as opposed to the first option. Certainly.
Yeah, but how does that happen?
I think that happens not through a lot of finicky planning, but through robust mass transit programs.
Yeah, I agree.
That's it. And that's not something that, and that's something that can be done now, at least in principle. So it doesn't require a gigantic change in the, the ideological underpinnings of capitalism or, socialism or anything like that. It is possible to have robust mass transit systems now. And I think that's, if we're talking about solutions to the car problem, then that's probably the best one. Beyond that, though, cars do still have as I said, cars do have a role to play, I think.
Sure, we have ambulances, and those are good. Well, and we have fire trucks and police cars, those are good.
Yeah, but we've also been talking quite a bit about, large cities. And that is, to be fair, where most people live, both in Canada and in the world. Most people live in large cities. Cities large enough to have a mass transit option, at least. Maybe not one anyone wants to use, depending on where you live, but it's there. And so, at least in principle, it could be, done properly. But for someone who's living in a small town of, say, 5,000 people, like someone who's living in the interior, what do you do if where you work is, a 20-minute drive from where you live? Well, a bus isn't going there.
I think that this is the real crux of the problem, where we need a very strong state, or not necessarily state, but municipal or provincial or federal organized campaign project to increase and expand public transit. And that requires a lot of money, and people bitch about taxes and shit, and there's not a lot of money for public infrastructure projects. And I think that this is one of the problems that capitalism makes much worse, in the fact that public services, whether it's transportation or otherwise, are constantly underfunded. And this is a big obstacle in making a better infrastructure for people to get around in a way that doesn't involve them waiting in traffic for infinite time every day.
There was the 401 is the most traveled road in North America, highway. Mm-hmm. But there was also this highway in LA where they had a traffic jam for 3 months. Solid. It was slow traffic day and night for infinitely, essentially. It was just this.
The math just didn't work.
Yeah, it was just no, if you got onto that road, you were in that traffic jam. It wasn't just the rush hour. It was rush forever.
One of the really interesting things that there's kind of a war between cars and bikes and other forms of transportation.
Sure, we've got
where cars are feel like they're the the roads have literally been built for them, and they are the grand supremacists of the roads. And recently in Vancouver, there was a proposal to convert a bunch of streets for cars to bike lanes on Point Grey in Vancouver. And the city hall, when they were having their debates, proceedings about whether or not they should do that, was inundated with people coming, and it was very divisive. There was this car encampment where I own the roads, I drive a car, these roads are for me, fuck your bikes, I want to own the roads. And then,
and from the way you said that, I assume those are the people you agree with.
And bicyclists that are yeah, maybe we can have some road for us so we can bike on them, please. But just the fact that, and not just in Vancouver, in Toronto, Rob Ford, when he was the mayor, painted over a bunch of, not personally of course, but had the city paint.
I can see him personally doing that.
He would. Painting over the bike lanes, saying that these roads are for cars. And so there is this war between automobiles and cars for supremacy of the transportation lanes, essentially. Because on one hand you have the traditional capitalist mindset of private, this is my space, this is my car, these are my roads, this is my garage, this is my parking space, that want to transform the way that people move around cities. And people that own cars, some of them are very angry, and there's this animosity between these two groups. And it's interesting to see this dynamic play out. Where the people that support methods of public transportation and alternative methods of transportation are butting heads with the status quo.
See, this is the thing where I think we might disagree a fair bit, and we've kind of disagreed a bit throughout this. I see it as three options, right? You've got cars, you've got the alternative transportation options, which is basically bicycles.
And buses and
No.
trains.
Mass transit is the third option.
Right, okay.
I don't see bikes as in the same category as mass transit.
Oh, no, I agree with you. But I think if you see the same problem, though, when they try to convert car lanes...
Bus lanes, yeah.
Into bus lanes or SkyTrain or whatever, there's this kind of dominant attitude that car drivers themselves have over the roads. How do you think we can move beyond that? What will it take for public transportation to be the main method of getting people from point A to point B?
For the most part, it will take some kind of political will. We haven't seen that in North America for quite a long time. I mean, highways are easier to build than basically anything else these days, and even highways are kind of a lost cause.
But they're expensive, and they're a waste of fucking time.
They're expensive, but certainly when it comes to things like even just like maintaining the highways and bridges is become kind of a weight that municipal governments can't carry anymore.
We can repurpose the infrastructure that we already have.
Some of it for buses, maybe. And I mean, the thing is when we're talking about mass transit, we are talking about something that will just use the roads a lot less. And so it may be that those highways are just like a capacity that at some point in the future we'll just never really use again. We don't need... In the future, we might not need the 401 to be 16 lanes wide. It just might be that we don't need that, and that's just it. It'll just be that. It's not like we're going to knock them down. They'll just be there, and that's fine.
Yeah, but, I mean, I guess the question is, what's the best way to repurpose them? I mean, we have this concrete shit that's in the ground.
I mean, you can make bike lanes and fun little...
SkyTrain. Let's make a bunch of SkyTrains. You could build... I think that, trains are better than buses because there's just, SkyTrain, like the one in Vancouver.
Yep,
there's
the one in Vancouver.
Perpetual continuity about it that is so great, where I know that the next train will come in 5 minutes. Well... And it doesn't depend on a driver.
You just take the B-line. Any one of the B-lines in Vancouver, it's the exact same experience. It's just going to come, and it'll come soon.
On the other hand, the B-line is, the worst example of public transit because...
Why? Because it's a sardine can?
Yes, because you're literally taking a ride with the armpit of your neighbor on a hot summer day.
Yeah, but that's the social alternative. That's. I mean, at the end of the day, when we're talking about those people who complain about, those people who are driving in their cars with 4 seats and one person and the air conditioning on and their windows rolled up and they're just singing out to the radio. That is the other end of the spectrum.
No, you're wrong. Public transit can be better, okay? You don't have to take... I want a world where we don't have to inhale the armpit of your fellow neighbor on public transit.
And I'm saying that is the price I'm willing to pay.
Sure, so am I, but wouldn't it be better if it was just better than that, where it was spacious? You could have your own seat, for example. You weren't crowded.
I love sitting on the bus.
The
more than
reason why
standing.
people don't take public transportation more is because it is crowded and it is shitty.
Yeah, well, you don't. No, come on. No one on public transit doesn't know that too. The people who take public transit take it because it's cheap.
Fine. I'm saying that you shouldn't just have to feel like you need to take public transportation and put your nose into someone else's armpit. I think public transportation should be well funded and better so that you can have your own seat. You can just read a book and it's not an inconvenience to you because you're surrounded by stinky people in the summer weather. Public transportation can be great. It can be better.
It has been great.
I've had
excellent experiences on a bus.
The thing about cars is that you're stuck at the wheel. You can't read a book because you will kill someone running them over, etc. Mm-hmm. So if we can have a public transportation system that is so well funded and is so accessible to greater amounts of people that you can spend the time that you are spending in commute to your work doing other productive things. And the only way that this is possible, in my opinion, is through some sort of state intervention. Socialism would be great, but otherwise some sort of well-funded public system of transportation to focus on rail instead of expanding these stupid additional freeways to stopgap a perpetual problem of car overuse.
Well, honestly, I would say that all sounds wonderful, but personally, I'm willing to pay the price of having an obnoxious, smelly neighbor if it means, getting to work on time and not destroying the environment. I consider that a cheap payoff.
Okay, sure.
I don't think it has to be the case, but I don't think we have to even go that far beyond it to make a case for mass transit.
If we're trying to make public transport the main method of getting to point A to point B...
Yeah, but we don't have to be imaginary about it. We can honestly say that that the unpleasant bus ride would be better for society than all the ways in which most of the ways we use cars now.
Well, that brings up a really interesting point. Is will people do the thing that's better for society or the thing that's better for themselves?
Well, I think that's I have no idea, really. Unless you give them a reason to. I think capitalism is furnishing more and more reasons why cars are not worth the trouble every single day. Right. So I don't think we have our work cut out for us. It's as far as I'm concerned, it's just a matter of time. Fewer and fewer people can afford to own a car. Cars have less and less of the flexibility they used to have. The industry is weak. It doesn't have the clout it used to have. So, therefore, I think that, mass transit will, on its own terms, gain that credibility in time.
Only if the mass transit systems are actually built, though, to where people need to go to and from.
Well, maybe. But that's sort of the political side of things. If those transit, but that's the easy part. That just funding, throwing money at BC Transit or whoever is the simple side of this problem. I mean, we've talked a lot about the cultural, just the weight, the dominance of cars, and I'm saying that I think that what we're looking at today is a world where cars have kind of reached their zenith and are now slowly sinking into less and less a relevant world.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I wonder if cars will... I think that cars will continue to be the dominant form of transportation under capitalism, because cars and capitalism just are best friends. They work well together.
Well, maybe, but
do we need a socialist transformation of society before we can move beyond this?
I don't think so. I think the constraints of capitalism, the pathetic sort of situation capitalism is in, has sort of solved this problem for us, the same way it solved the problem of the suburbs. People just can't afford to buy houses, no matter where they are.
Right.
That's it. The end. People just have sort of, a larger and larger portion of the population has just sort of given up on that goal.
So they kind of need to change the zoning laws to accommodate the economic reality.
Yeah, probably. I mean, this is sort of the situation I think we're looking at. We're looking at capitalism we're looking at a capitalism that is unique to our era, and because of that, the state of the automobile industry, cars, and what they're used for is different. It's special. It's this. We're not just creating these kind of grand pronouncements of what cars can and can't do. I think what we need to be doing is looking at the automobile industry, looking at automobiles, looking at cars, and saying what they're capable of, what they're reasonably capable of in the modern world is so limited compared to what they used to be. And that's okay, because we have all these better options of it anyway.
Right.
And that's fine, and I think that's what everybody sort of needs to be going out into the rest of the world making a case for, that cars are not the default option anymore.